Okay, hello everyone. I am here today. My name is Adèle Berault, and I would like to apologize for Gaëtan Ricard, who should have been the moderator for this session, but she could not attend the meeting. She told us that she was sick, so she won't be there. That's why. So I'm very happy to present you and to introduce the three speakers today: Daniel Kaplan, Scott Longfellow, and Jennifer Helen Rudkin, that I will give the floor to and let them introduce themselves. And then after, I will ask them some questions that deal with imagination in Europe, and we will have 1 hour of discussion. Thank you for your understanding and your presence here today. So please, Jennifer, Mrs. Rudkin, could you introduce yourself and tell us more about you and your work at the European Commission?
Thank you, Adèle. You can indeed call me Jennifer, there's no problem. So I'm here replacing Xavier Troussard, the head of the unit in which I work in the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. The unit I work in has design, foresight, behavioral insights, and modeling competences. And we look at the future of different topics that are brought to our plate. The nearest one I've been working with is the future of government and also the future of farmers, for example. And so I'm happy to be here to discuss this concept of future of Europe, or the imagination around what Europe can be.
Thank you very much. Please, Daniel Kaplan, could you also introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, thank you. I'm the co-founder of a nonprofit organization called the Plurality University Network, which work of artists and journalists who are looking at art through and just historically, I'm also part of the founders of one of the original public policy design organizations in France called the 27th Region.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Longfellow, could you also present yourself to the audience today? You are mute.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Longfellow. I'm a design curator. I'm currently working in a design agency called RF Studio. I've also organized several design festivals. And I think I'm invited in this conference because we created an exhibition called Science Fiction, the Sense of Fiction, where we investigated the relationship between design and fiction in order to understand the scope of or the consequences of fiction in our daily uses or practices. And so I'm happy to talk about those topics today with you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's talk. I will begin with maybe one main question about the link between fiction and design, and maybe detail this question with two different questions. The first one is, how does design can mobilize fiction, and also how imagination can fuel design? Maybe Scott, thanks to this exhibition and all the works your design studio has done, you can begin and give your opinion.
Yeah, of course. We start the exhibition with with a room dedicated to a person. Maybe you can show the photo of this man, because the photo tells it all. So it's called Hugo Guernsbach. He was an European. He was from Luxembourg, and he decided to immigrate to the United States as an inventor. He wanted to live the perfect American dream, and with this really idea of entrepreneur. Old Europe could not possibly understand his venture, of course. But what's interesting is that he was completely crazy about electricity, which is completely true for this period. So he first tried to make a company that sold electronic components, and to sell these electronic components, he became an editor with magazines to help people to understand how electricity worked. And at one time, in 1911, he decided to introduce a story in this in these manuals, and then start fiction. So and it was indeed in one of these publications that first see the term of scientific fiction, which launched an entire genre, the fictional representation of scientific progress. And what I can say is that the scope of fiction in usage and in our daily habits is really linked with science and technique. And the power of this vision of the transformation of our life by science is the really dominating narratives that we have today, and that totally influence our daily habits.
Okay. So what you say that.
And what's interesting at this period is that the companies and Hollywood and advertisement and publicity created an ecosystem really powerful to influence our daily habits with this vision of progress, technical progress, as social progress, which is for us the main narrative.
Okay. Hugo Guernsbach is at the early 20th century, right? Is it?
Yeah, he arrived in the United States in 1904, and he edited his first magazines in 1908, and the pure science fiction magazine starts in the 20s and lasts till the 60s, I guess.
Thank you very much. Maybe, Daniel, you give us a very historical element, which is very, very interesting. He is like the pioneer. Daniel Kaplan, do you have an opinion on it, on the fact and the link between fiction and design? Maybe that is more actual, that in the modern time? Daniel Kaplan, could you hear us?
Sorry, I was muted. Okay. So what Scott has been saying is also happening in the present, obviously. What design does is kind of create a bridge or a triangulation between senses, images, emotions on one side, function on the other side, and the industrial system. That is something that is designed is designed in order to be able to be produced, preferably mass-produced, and usable by real people in real situations, but in a way that also provokes emotions and engages the senses. So that's one of, to me at least, one of the definition of this cross-discipline. Now, it's also a challenge when we're talking, especially in view of our topic today, because as you can see with Guernsbach, but also with other situations, that gives design a power to sort of feed from public imagination in order to influence it, in order to transform it towards the goals of those who fund the designers and the designers' work. And so when today a lot of designers are thinking about using their methods and the power of their cross-discipline in order to achieve public policy goals, in order to achieve maybe sometimes reorientation towards more desirable goals for production, we have to keep in mind that originally, to me at least, design is contemporary with marketing and is contemporary to a moment in the industrial system where responding to needs that people actually felt became not enough. You had to create needs, and you had to create powerful disciplines that talked to people's senses and imaginations so that they would feel that need that they didn't feel before. And so you can change that, but you cannot change it if you don't acknowledge that this is how we've been mostly using design and training designers for several decades.
Yes, I can, maybe I have two reactions. So one is I don't know if it's the right time, but indeed, so here in the Policy Lab, we also develop like speculative prototypes. This is in the context of farmers of the future. We had design school participate, the School of Saint-Étienne, this one in France, in making tangible objects that would show the tools that farmers of the future may use. And we brought this into our policy lab. We brought in colleagues from across the commission. We had organized a speed dating for the students to physically present the prototypes to the different people in the commission working on this topic of farmers of the future. So they're looking at how to maybe change policies or bring in new policies to ensure a bigger diversity and a more sustainable farming system in the future. And so it was very well received by our colleagues in the commission to use this means that, as Scott was saying, it's really driven by looking at newest technologies and imagining what they may be in the future and how they may fit in a given context, this one being the farming one. And so from a designer perspective, I was very happy that in the commission, the colleagues were sensitive to tangible products that allowed to open up conversations that were different than what they were used to having, because they were exchanging with students, but also because they were outside they were in a safe place, let's say, to have discussions that they normally don't have. And also the concretization of this of the good quality of this work is that they were invited then to present these prototypes to the Outlook conference, which in the Agricultural Directorate General of the European Commission, it's a very important event for all the people working in agriculture. So the students who had worked on these prototypes, there were 12 prototypes, were able to then go to this Outlook conference and continue discussing with different policy makers, etc. So that's one concrete aspect. And on the other side, I also wanted to bounce on what Danielle said about the context, which indeed I find interesting in the sense that if we speak of imagination of Europe, and if we think of the American dream, for example, the context is very different in the sense that the American dream was also an economic dream. Well, it was to conquer territory and to be successful economically speaking, let's say. And so here, if I were to think of a Europe, imagination around Europe, our context is different. Now we're talking about the planet, and the constraints are more linked to maybe sustainability that we hear now as being the main goal. So how to be sustainable, and also this social aspect that Scott was also underlining as being our new aim, let's say. So in this term, I'm wondering, or I can maybe throw out there how to imagine this Europe linked to this need of preserving the planet, or yeah, that was my reaction.
Maybe, I don't know if you want to react directly, but your remark, Jennifer, is very linked to the title of this session today, which is about the battle of imagination. And that's why I'm going to ask you, to the three of you, like, do you think there is a battle of imagination between maybe Europe, the United States, China, or other country, and what do you understand by this words, battle of imagination? If you, I don't know, raise hand for.
Okay, so maybe I can start, and if I could have the image of this flag that I brought with me, which is maybe not a flag that the audience knows very well. The third largest nation in the world, which is the refugee nation. Yep, no, that's not it.
Nope, not this one.
We're almost there. No, it was the right one. Yes, this one. So what's interesting? Can you stop the slideshow so that we can stay for a while on this image? So anyway, what's interesting there is it's not the work of a designer. It's the work of a Syrian refugee artist called Yara Said. And it is not an official flag because there's no nation, and it wasn't even the official flag when the Olympic Committee allowed a delegation of refugee sports persons in the last Olympics. But they were not allowed to carry a flag, but somehow in some competitions they ended up using it. Using this flag. So this could have been just a work of art, and it has been displayed in super trendy galleries, but it did become a political statement at some point, and a flag is typically one of the symbols that tries to embody what's imaginary, what the narrative or the metaphors behind one institution, which is a nation, a state, a territory, or something. So the reason why I wanted to share that in response to your questions is because maybe it tells us three different things. The first one is that any political construction is first, or at least simultaneously, an imaginary construction. There's no way you can decide that drawing lines on a map means that you're a nation if there's not the idea of that nation or region or conjunction of nation or whatever somewhere in people's minds. So imaginaries are here, they're born from action, but they generate action, they generate their own realities, and they also gather and give meaning to emerging realities. So in this case, there's groups that are saying, should we be a nation, or should we have a political existence as this nation of 300 or 400 million people that is, of course, not linked to a territory because it's all over the place, but it's in camps, it has, etc. The second thing that it can maybe tell us about the question of Europe is that if you want to be the carrier of powerful imaginaries, you need, even if you need to also carry some kinds of values, and then you need also to maybe live by them, which may be the issue with America these days, the land of the free, but which is also an issue with Europe. You may have noticed that this flag is of the orange color, and it's actually created of a break of life jackets, obviously of the life jackets of those people who die in the Mediterranean now. So what are the values that would today justify the fact that Europe is a dream worth dreaming? And that's really something that we need to be working on if we want to be somehow legitimate in asking that question. And maybe relating to what Jennifer was saying before that, I'm not entirely a fan of the title Battle of Imaginations. That would mean that there's existing camps that have a clear message or narrative behind them. Again, it's not that obvious. All stuck with obsolete narratives and imaginations, that of extractive progress, if I want to summarize it really too rapidly. And we're failing to find another. Naomi Klein used to say that climate change is a failure of imagination. If this is true, the real battle is a battle for imagination, for the ability to move away from what doesn't work and find and together find other kinds of narratives, metaphors, images, symbols that would be the ones of a sustainable world. And in this, I don't think we're any better than China or America. And I don't think that these lines of battle should be drawn in this way.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much. And Scott, do you want to react or add something? What do you think about Mr. Kaplan's opinions? You are mute again.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you can hear me now. Yeah, I totally agree. It's not a question of battles of imaginaries, but more how can we step out of the breakdown of imaginaries? That's really important, and maybe that's where design can be useful. I think rediscovering the performative power of storytelling in our daily usage is really important. Now, when we talk about future, it's quite often dark apocalypses or wars of climate change that made our lives totally impossible. So maybe if you try to have visions of the futures that are plurals, that are different, maybe we can have a transformation in an easy way that is not only trying to cut down our way of life. And this is really important for us. And maybe what is design, what is the role of design in this is to try to help to model, to design these stories that everyone can see what it will be and what it involves. To be precise and not being only political discourse, but maybe more that can touch everybody. That's why we try to do some fiction, and we really we want to rediscover the performative power of storytelling to maybe build a different Europe.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll react. So maybe we can ask the question of or reiterate why we need new imaginaries. So because there's a democratic urgency, climatic urgency, and an economic crisis that doesn't allow for social justice. And so there's a broken machine that requires us to make like a imaginary jump and to make a profound transformation and indeed to maybe shift the paradigms or to get into a transition. And when looking at the why, we can also look at what do we have in hand to actually imagine. So for a designer, we would say, what is the raw material? What are we? What material can we touch to be able to give insight and to stimulate imagination of Europe? And that's where we realize that, in fact, the European reality is not well known amongst European citizens. And so they don't have the means to be able to create Europe because most of the people don't know what it is or don't relate to it. So then how do you address this need of maybe informing people or giving them something so that they can actually think Europe or feel part of or even imagine a better Europe in a sense? And then I guess the question is, who do we need to build this imaginary around Europe? Who is expected to imagine it, and who should take part in it? And is this, as many design for policy activities are now, including the citizen and making it a collaborative and participatory work? Or are we expecting from the people in power to come up with an image of what this Europe is? So that's a bit open questions, but I find it indeed it's a challenging question.
And are you, beside this indeed, yeah, it's a challenging question. And do you have like concrete example of answers? Like, do you know, and maybe can you, how can we use design in order to create this European common fiction, common narrative, and maybe involve more and more the citizens in the European construction? As maybe, I don't know if you can just put in context the European construction at the like 60 years ago, but today, like, yeah, how can we create the best situation to foster European construction? Like, do you have specific example? Maybe you have in your own practice some example, not directly focus on Europe, but more about like creating imaginaries, creating fiction. Like, yeah, maybe Jennifer, you can tell us more, and then Daniel and Scott, you can then react. But yeah, now how can we use and mobilize design in this area?
Yeah, so I guess from designer working at the commission point of view. So at our level here, we try to include different stakeholders at different times of the projects that we do.
Okay.
And so in the Joint Research Center, we provide evidence on different topics, and then so it goes to the colleagues at the commission, who then integrate it or not in their new policies. And so at our level, we try to involve design schools, design labs, to experiment different ways of including people. So we don't work only with experts. What could I say, from more personal point of view, for having worked on both foresight or for working both on foresight and design, I'm more interested in the concept of the thickness of the present, let's say, and to build imagination, not so much on projecting the future, but more on being more sensitive to the different ways of seeing or interpreting, or the different ways in which the present is actually materialized. And for me, that would be an interesting way maybe to go towards imagining the future, not the future, to imagining Europe, I mean. Yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question. There are a few elements.
No, but maybe Scott, you want? Could you react? I know all your work about creating new fiction in the present time, and maybe some of this the fiction you have creating and you have been working on could be interesting to share at the European level. And you are again mute if you want to talk. Yes, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't really know if the construction of Europe is I can say an imaginary powerful enough to be a story of transformation, but maybe it can be its home where we try to reinvent the future. So at the end of the exhibition, we decided to be involved in creating new narratives for new futures, because it was really powerful to transform our daily life, this story about technical progress. And we just asked ourselves, what will be the story powerful enough to make those changes today? And we decided to go on 5 topics, and maybe there are 3 that can be really interesting with European construction. The first is the story of the commons, how we can build a more collaborative society.
Hello, Scott.
Talking about participation, about how citizens can help to build the political system. So maybe we have to go back to the story of commons that used to be European, and which where people work together on a territory. It can be material or not, but it's really important to have this involvement. Another one is the notion of work. How do we want to work tomorrow? In the face of generalized automation, work has gradually lost its primary meaning. now it's a bit hard to say I'm going to work and I'm going to be really involved in what I'm doing. And maybe Europe can help to find some ways to have more meaning in the work. And the third one maybe is a relation with living beings and how we can step out from an extractive industry toward our environment and be more linked with the environment. I guess it's 3 ways that Europe can endeavor.
Daniel, do you agree with this? No, not do you agree, but what's your opinion on these 3 different thematics? Do you think Europe should tackle other thematics, and how to come back to this? My first question: how do you think we can use design in order to create this European fiction, European, and draw the European future?
Yeah, maybe again to answer, I'm going to take one very concrete example of a work that mixed foresight and design in a very interesting way. If I could have the image of the suitcase, that would be great. And this example is about a work that was done under a person called Arati Krishnan, in the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. And this is a 100-year-old organization that was asking itself the question, okay, where humanitarian crises and issues are changing in nature, what does it take for us to remain relevant in the coming century? So it's not exactly the level of European Commission, but it's not a small level. The IFRC is present in almost all countries of the world. And what was interesting is that first thing that they did was do workshops with people everywhere on the ground who were actually facing different types of crises, with different types of people, with different types of actors present on the ground, working with different technologies, etc. And then they used design. They didn't use design before as a pure provocation, and they used specific kinds of design. I'm wondering, can I have the image or not?
Yeah, I think it's coming. It's coming.
Because
here it is.
Yeah,
sorry.
That's it.
It's the good one. Yes.
Yes, it's the right one. Perfect. Thank you. So it's just a suitcase. The interesting thing, and it's part of the whole work. Yes, we're almost there.
Yes, this one. Yes, correct.
Don't change anything. Nobody touches anything. Design issues with the software here. So it doesn't look like a design work, but what's interesting there is that it's the result of a co-design work where a group from, let me find where, from the University of, I will tell you when I'm speaking, of Newcastle, worked with young Lebanese persons and tasked them with imagining the suitcase in which they would carry their dreams, but also everything that they would need with them 20 years from now. So know-hows, tools, contacts, stuff like that. So one thing, again, is that it has to be in a suitcase, meaning that, well, maybe they'll have to leave not too close from where they are, but also, of course, it's a common reflection of what's needed, what's essential, what we should travel with, or what we should find when we arrive anywhere. And so what I'm taking from this, first of all, maybe answering Jennifer's remark on present and future. Any futures work is just a detour through an imaginary place that is called the future, in order to bring back elements for the present. And what's interesting is when it's somehow grounded. But again, imagination is grounded. Imagination creates wars, countries, religion, etc. So it is grounded, but you have to work with people, and that's one of the big issues. We will not do anything worthwhile with the images of Europe if it's just our rulers or a group of excellent scientists or excellent artists and designers coming up with super powerful images and getting people to buy in on them. That's not going to work. So what I'm seeing with how a number of designers are trying to work is that they're not bringing in the heroic gesture of creating a magnificent object or service. They're bringing it methods that can bridge ideas, lived experiences, aspirations, and projections, and the ability to produce incarnations to which you can actually react with your senses, react with your emotions. And they're also trying to produce methods for engagement, for real engagement. So what we need, and I think that really resonates with what I heard from Jennifer and Scott, is co-design, collaboration in even of places of discussion. You can't even tell people where to discuss the issues that they're going to discuss. You can't provide a definitive list of issues that will be discussed. Even this list is evolving all the time, and it has to be the issues that people discuss. So we need design, but we need some kind of a modest design that weaves into other kinds of methods, places, or contexts. That's interested in what people do on their own. That doesn't always look for a beautiful shape. I mean, the suitcase here is probably not beautiful, but it's powerful because the process that brought people to do it and that brought this to Geneva in an exhibition that actually fed into the real strategic plan that now the Red Cross is following, that's what's powerful. And that's the kind of thing that maybe design could help do for this idea or this set of institutions or both, that is Europe.
Yeah, I don't know if Scott, you want to react, or you're muted.
Yeah, maybe the design is always dealing with the future because we're designing things that doesn't exist. So I totally agree with Daniel. The importance of design is not only the object, but the methods to go to the object or the service or the artifact produced. But what we're interested in is that designers need to convince their audience that they have the best projects. So they have good way to produce seductive narratives for the future, and they need to have the good story, which can only be made with the people, with different people, to have a good future. So designers have maybe good methods to help to build this future and not only create the imaginative, but the passes to go toward it. How do you work, Jennifer, as a designer in the European Commission?
Yes, indeed. How? I, on a personal ground, even as a designer, but also because my work here demands also that we bring in other voices, but also within the commission when we help different directorate generals, for example, to discuss on a project. So we are considered offering them a safe place, and also one of our tasks is to organize exploratory sessions to allow them to unpack the actual meaning of the topic and to redefine the starting questions in a shared space to be sure that everyone agrees and that there's a common understanding of the starting point of any project that we work on. So this has been an interesting part of the work. Now we're using a lot of mapping to create different canvases that allow for gearing conversations outside of the normal questions, bringing in more social, environmental, or questioning governance, or bringing in different aspects of conversation. But then, yes, as I was saying, on a more personal side, I find that sometimes we put too much pressure on the citizens, so we expect a lot. We now want to bring him into everything to kind of justify that every idea, every process has been done, including as many people as possible, and sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes people need to be informed, but they don't need to actually participate, and sometimes the contrary. So I think we do have to be careful of not being systematic in bringing in people in creative processes, because then we find ourselves with loads of data, loads of narratives from people, and we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to make sense of it, and sometimes the experience that the people had is more important, and that is the result. So it's more the independent experience that they had that will allow them to maybe change their perception of Europe, or change their fears and expectations regarding the future. But sometimes we bring them in expecting a final result that then or is not satisfying, or is we don't have the capacity to process it and to make something out of it. So it's difficult to then be honest to the people we bring in. So I just wanted to point this difficulty that I find a lot in the different design processes that we have here.
Yeah, maybe to react on this. Obviously, what I was saying was in response to the question about imagining Europe, or what Europe would be for people, and that's hard to do without the people. If you have to, there's a lot of cases in which non-participatory design can actually do the work, obviously, but I was interested in what you were very rightly saying, that when you bring in people, you get loads of narratives. And it doesn't provide you a clear path towards decision. Of course not. And that's why what we created is called the Plurality University. That is the point being that we're probably at a moment where we need to look for new imaginaries, new narratives, new images, new metaphors, because if I want to use just one adjective, a sustainable world is probably so different from today's world that we're almost incapable of figuring out what it looks like with the tools of today, and even of organizing discussions about what it looks like with the tools of public discussion today. And so there's no way you can find a magic process where people will converge towards the right narrative that they will all feel engaged with and in communion with. What you can try and do is get people to actually interact on narratives, which is at least slightly better than interacting on fantasized pasts or identities because usually, or at least if you're clear about the plurality of narratives, that is, you don't want to push one, then you don't have to kill yourselves about who you are and what the right meaning of Europe or France or whatever is, or whether you are of this or that religion, etc. So there's a power in looking for the plurality of narratives and not looking for synthesis at this stage, and of letting people maybe interact a little more with their own imagination. I mean, a lot of politicians now pride themselves of not doing ideology, of just solving everyday problems. And this is an engineer's job. This is not the job of people who are supposed to help a world that is coming to an end to change. So we need to reconnect from the highest to the lowest levels to our ability to imagine. And in terms of processes, at least, but also in terms of incarnation, there's a lot that designers can do if they're interested in that. It's, again, generally not what they're trained to, even if that's changing, but there's a lot of designers who are looking for that. And at least it's hard, so nobody's found the magic recipe, but it's really interesting and worth looking for.
Yes, just you may have heard of our president Ursula von der Leyen, who launched the new European Bauhaus. So in line with this tentative to bring in culture in transition towards sustainability, there's now discussion on how to go about to build this process that would allow for designers, architects, different types of inputs to come into the decisions, the policy-making decisions.
Yes, but what we learned from the power of fiction in the 20th century is that designers and architects that works alone doesn't lead to anywhere. It's a really collective work, even in terms of working with people that have power, with real industrial and all this. When you were talking that you were working with the farmers, which is a big question for Europe, I guess, for the future. How do you think you can transform our agriculture that is really productive toward a more sustainable way without telling different stories that will bring people to these changes? So, do you work with the narrative in the way of transform the policies of Europe?
Yeah, so the study that we do is a foresight study on the farmers of the future, and here we develop 12 potential future farmer profiles from the more corporate to the urban lifestyle, so they have different names. And this is feeding the work of our colleagues in the Directorate General of Agriculture, who include it in their assessments in view of creating policies that will ensure that we go towards a diversified agricultural system and a sustainable one. But so this question of sustainability is very complex. And actually, it's not only the Directorate General of Agriculture. So it's not only the policies around agriculture that have to be geared towards sustainability. It's almost all of the directorates, even the digital one, I mean, all of them would have to make changes in their policies so that we reach planet. So the direct effect of the work that we do in the Joint Research Center is not as straightforward. Like I can't tell you to what extent it's taken into consideration in the final decisions that are taken at a higher level. But we do work towards, yes, this mission of sustainability and justice for all, etc. If I hope I'm answering your question.
No, I'm just wondering how, because for me, a European Union for the moment is really abstract. As a citizen, I'm only talking like this. And to have, whereas, and we're seeing it with the coronavirus and all this, that's right. Whereas a country or a nation is really clear what it can do, what its rule, what is its power. So in order to build an imaginary of Europe, I think it needs concrete consequences or realities, and that's why I was talking about agriculture, because it's the only real policy that have a consequence on our daily life. So maybe as a designer of talking with the European imaginaries or narrative, maybe the idea is to make something tangible about this notion, which is for the moment, I guess, a bit a technostructure that doesn't really deal with the daily problems or daily habits. I'm a bit rude now, but
they do try in different ways to communicate the values of Europe and to extend their visibility to all European citizens. But for sure, for now, seeing a number of people who actually vote at the European elections, they haven't reached out to a sufficient number of people for Europe to be known. But at our level, so we work on specific topics, and so the scope of people that we can actually reach out to is not as big, I guess. Yeah. So we did do another work was on the future of government, where we also created different visuals to discuss what different types of governments could look like. So there were 4 scenarios. This was done with citizens in 6 different countries across Europe. And then we had 6 European design schools participate in making prototypes. So we had, I don't remember how many, 50 prototypes. So it was mainly service design, rethinking the government in terms of services more than products. And then we also developed an engagement tool. So it's a board game that allows for conversations to take place. So you create connections with the different people around the table. The board is, yeah, it's this half board thing. So we try as much as we can to bring in physical objects to really push for conversations, for even, I think the power of tangible objects is also very interesting to bring into this design for policies activities, rather than keep it only at the more organizational and structural intervention. But yes, in terms of power, I thought it was interesting, the image that you chose on Futurama. I was interested in knowing why you chose it, because in fact, it took place in a specific context that, if you look at the map, so it's really pushing on the opposite of sustainability. And so that's a bit the starting point to where we are now, in a sense. So it was General Motors, I think, who financed this exhibition. And you see now how the state of Detroit is, the social aspects that are in Detroit are a bit catastrophic. There was no cultural ministry for a time. I don't know if that has changed, but it's interesting to see how this this very nice setting is actually brought us to now we should reverse this Futurama image. I don't know, so how we should go towards the opposite, I guess.
Yeah, I think Scott and I both use Futurama, but at least on my side, it's clearly for that. It's just to illustrate that there's a seductive power of design that can actually produce really disastrous results, and that we need to be aware because it's so powerful, because it's not just art that has no connection to reality. It is art that has some kind of art. At least it is an incarnation that calls on the senses, on the aesthetic sense of people, on the emotions, but that has a connection to reality. And as Scott was saying, because it's in the future, that whose role it is to make a reality emerge somehow, or at least to make it more likely to emerge. So in this case, it did work very well, especially in America, but everywhere else. And yes, we're not entirely happy with it today, but we're stuck with it because it's also a huge negative comments, as people say it now. It's there. It's not going away soon, even if it's a little more empty these days than it used to be. So that's one aspect. Maybe I just wanted to react on one of the things that Scott said about Europe being concrete, because you could also say, and it's not more true, it's another aspect of reality, that in some cases what people complain about is that they feel the concrete aspects of Europe, regulation, this is allowed, this is not allowed, there's funding there, not funding there, and don't understand why, or feel that this is something that some decision from above somewhere that they've had no say in, and it probably both things are true, which is why at least I don't think that the only answer is to be super concrete in what it means for everybody's daily life. I think you need also to go into the telling of stories or the sharing of actual or potential experience. To me, probably the most eloquent program for Europe is Erasmus. That's the one that creates super powerful experiences for people. I don't know of any other, which it doesn't mean there's no other. It means that's the one I know. And so how can you maybe have an Erasmus also of stories, of visions, of desires, with incarnations such as the ones that Jennifer has been showing? And we need that. We also need to have very concrete discussions. But if we're talking about Europe as being a dream that could at some point gain power over the current discussions and maybe gain soft power internationally, then there's something like that needs to happen. And again, I'm just to finish, when I was thinking about the conference yesterday, I was wondering why I felt so attached to Europe, and I couldn't really find a reason. And because I'm also very ashamed of Europe these days. I'm ashamed of Europe not condemning non-democratic governments in its own ranks. I'm ashamed of Europe letting thousands of people die in the sea. And so basically the reason why is because I don't like borders, but that's not sufficient. I mean, it would mean that any kind of thing that would remove borders would like. So there's an issue that even people like me who are really strong defenders of Europe have a hard time figuring out why they are. So maybe we should do something about that.
Yeah, I think Europe leaks a narrative. When you talk about United States, you know what it is. When even if you think it's over now, but going to the moon or to Mars and all this, all right. But when I talk about concreteness, it's more about what is the European dream. Even if it's plural, now we don't really know what it is. And this is the main problem. We need to build imagination and stories of Europe in order to have a political construction, I think.
With loads of narratives.
Maybe I can just share with you a question from the audience. Let me just refine this. There was a first question concerning the new fiction for Europe, and could it also help tackle populism issue, and how we could tackle this question of issue, and how fiction could attenuate, soften, or maybe erase this populist situation. Like, I think it's a big question. It's not easy to reply, but yeah, and this is the question. Like, if I may just repeat it, a new imaginary for Europe could also help to tackle populism, but of course, how to build it, what design could bring. You are all mute if you want to reply. Yeah.
It's a super small question, that's why. It's just not worth answering so easy. Yeah. Now, so I'll try it. So one thing is, if you have no perspective, if there's no narrative, whatever that word means, that gives any kind of sense to what you're doing, what you're experiencing in your life, what your community is about, etc. At least in a Western mind, there's a gap. There's a gap of what am I here for? How do I judge that what I'm doing makes any sense at all, except maybe on a very local plane? So if you don't have that, and we don't have that for many reasons, some of them good. I mean, maybe 60 years ago, we had a very small list of ready-to-use imaginaries. You had the communist radiant future, you had progress, you had fascism a little bit before that, and you just had to choose. And then you had millions of people and organizations and institutions and intellectuals to help you think. And so and we're not exactly sorry that this is not there anymore, but there's nothing that's come to replace it. And so when you don't have it, that's when you have, I don't like to call it populisms for many reasons, but what you have is fantasized identities that you need to cling to, and you need to find the people who are the same kind of identities, and that produces either despair, you have nothing, or anger and possibly war. Now the question is, I don't think there's any hope or even desire to come back to one narrative that would say, okay, Europe is this. The question is, are we capable of relating to narratives, which would be, discussing politics, discussing what we'd like to see, discussing how we see the world becoming in the future? Are we capable of going back to that ability of flexing that muscle that's come to, that's in a complete state of atrophy? Do you say that in English? Yeah, okay. Because at least in French school, you're absolutely taught to not use it at all. And then in serious organizations, you're taught that this is definitely not the right method to work. And so I feel that what we need is thousands of narratives interacting with one another, weaving with one another, continuing one another, and people getting used to talking about narratives, that is, to talking about what could be. And that can be done, and narratives is not just texts. It can be images, it can be objects, it can be things that you can touch, and maybe, but it's even better if when you touch it, you can maybe think, okay, could I change it as well, and mix it with my own personal. And so at least the kind of practice that we're trying to do in the Plurality University network is this: when we were looking at a topic, we first start to look for the biggest possible number of existing narratives of the future of that topic, and then trying to start a work based on this diversity, and it's fairly powerful in some settings.
Do you want to react? Because I can react to something. It's very a pity that Gaëtan isn't here, because I think she would have shared with you all the projects from Ursula von der Leyen about the conference on European future. It was an address to the European citizen and a program of the European Commission and the Parliament about organizing a new type of consultation, new type of talking with everyone. And I think, and that's a pity Gaëtan isn't here, because maybe she could have told us that this new kind of project was the opportunity to listen new narrative and to came to make new narrative came up. So that's very a shame she's not here. I hope she will listen to this discussion and maybe have some new ideas about this project. Yeah, I can give you a link. And there is a very long question in this chat for you, Mr. Kaplan. If you can read it and react, it would be easier for me not to read it, presumably it's in a...
You're talking about the last question by Sasha?
Yeah, why Europe ask possibly preserving legacies and creating new ones? Just need to know.
It's not so much a question as a remark, but it's interesting, obviously, yeah. And it's not that easy to answer here, because the remark is that maybe we need to let go the concept of Europe towards broader places of interaction and exchange and circulation. And I would tend to agree. And then, and I'd love to do works on this. Now, as a realist as well, I'm also happy that at least there's this territory of somewhat free circulation if you're not a migrant. And it's already a very powerful proposition. So it could become a beacon for something that goes further than that. But again, it has to solve the shame of today's relationship to migrants.
We are dealing with very tough questions today. The bigger the better. Maybe we can switch to the question on Slido. At the beginning of the discussion, we asked the audience some question, and we could look at the results, and I will encourage you to react to them. Please, Yes, thank you very much. How do you imagine Europe tomorrow? I'll just give you a slight moment to read the answers of the question, how do you imagine the Europe of tomorrow? Interest, unit vision. Okay. And maybe Mr. Kaplan, Daniel, Jennifer, and Scott, do you have like remarks to these answers? I know there is some that we have been discussing today, but these answers seems to be somehow concrete. In a way or in another. If you are talking, you are mute and I can't listen to you.
Yeah, I can react with I'm thinking now following this idea that we should continue stimulating narratives and building narratives. I see that now we are also faced with this constraint of online exchanges and online work, and a very practical remark here, but it's true that we need to find solutions to continue building our narratives and not be stuck with this type of communication. And perhaps it's also an example that we're not that advanced in mastering digital tools. I see the limitations to creating spaces to discuss on internet. I find very challenging to do a workshop on the internet. It's even more challenging than when you're actually with people, and you also realize how much better to some extent it is to do all these design processes when you're actually able to be physically present with the people. So I don't know, there's this very current issue of online, and how do we exchange, how do we continue having conversations, and et cetera, to continue building an imaginary around Europe.
There is a remark from the audience which is interesting because in the reply there is an answer about European interests, and Sasha Alexander just asked if European interest mean firewall or more something that is more permeable with open imagination, like either one of the other. Like, is it a pare-feu, a firewall, or is it something that can be linked and very connected to open fiction about Europe? That's it. So, yeah. Again, tough question, very maybe difficult. If Mr. Sasha Alexander wish to detail this remark, we would be happy to understand it, and if not, thank you.
Hi, it's Sasha here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a big question, because in a way you want to preserve the cultural legacies, but then again you want to grow your imagination with new experiences. Maybe all the reasons why we travel the world and then maybe return home are reassured by those things that we know. So I'm curious, if you want to maintain the identity of Europe, what will a Europe look like in the early 21st century, and what will it look like in the later 21st century. So if Europe was to maybe double in population, where the new half of the population came from instantly from other parts of the world and within 5 years, that would be quite a shock to the system. That's why I think whoever might have mentioned it might have suggested that that could be the price that would need to be paid. So would need a considerable mind shift and a lot of bravery. So, but with the United Nations goals, if we have 10 years, that's going to require a lot of bravery. So the thought is, if it has to happen, maybe that's the catalyst that makes it happen. The only thing is the magnitude of the change and maybe the structures that are in place, whether they can take that level of punishment or load. Because moving to a new Bauhaus, one thing is convincing people what the Bauhaus was and what it could become. So that's quite a story. But that big story that Daniel mentioned about, how we feel about these refugee villages, and I can't imagine how they're dealing with COVID. If I'm living in a city of 5.5 million people with Zoom capability and I drive a European car, what are they doing in those refugee villages? I have no idea. So I just put it out there as a big question, something provocative, but we've all got our firewalls. I've got walls around my home. I've got a larger fence at the front that's like an electric gate, which I didn't need some years ago. So I've got my own small firewalls. Some are cultural, some are physical. I just thought I'd throw that in the conversation.
Thank you very much. It's nice to conclude on this remark, as we all understand that we have work to do, and that we have to be very enthusiastic and create a future that is desirable for everyone concerning Europe. So thank you for your remark. Thank you for all the speakers today who have been very interested and interesting for all of us. I would like to tell you again that Gaëtan was not here, and we hope she will be fine. Thanks again for all the players, all the participants today, and that's it. I also would like to address you and to tell you that the final session, the synthetical session that will begin at 5 p.m. this afternoon, and that you can not register, but you can log in by clicking in the link in the chat at 5 p.m. Again, thank you very much for all this very interesting conversation. To conclude, we all know that now we have works to do, and that we would just want to create something that is desirable, like that people want to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Adèle.